Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second session in our volunteer stream in the City of Monash Club Development Program. Tonight's session on leadership on and off the field. For those who I haven't met yet, my name's Jesse Drever. I'm from Leisure Networks. We are a regional sports assembly based in the Barwon region and work really closely with partners in metropolitan Melbourne. We are also a registered NDIS provider, so we work very closely to provide support to those with a disability, especially in the community sport and recreation sector. Tonight's session, as I said, leadership on and off the field. The first session in the series 2 weeks ago on volunteer management, and the third session in 2 weeks' time is around being your best, which will be delivered by our partner, Howard Andrews. For those that attended the governance workshops at the end of last year, Paul from Howard Andrews delivered a couple of sessions in that stream, and he'll be talking in this stream as well, with particular relevance, especially in the volunteer stream, around roles and obligations of committee members. How committees can be best structured and how to run effective meetings. So really talking from the governance angle, but within a volunteer stream. So you can, I guess, best set your club up in terms of your structures that can really support what you are doing as a club. Tonight's session, what we're going to do, we're going to go back very quickly at the start and just reflect on some of the things we learnt within the first session. And then we're going to really look into leadership and the role that plays in influencing and impacting volunteers around our clubs and what we can do as individuals. So we're going to really unpack the concepts of leadership. For those that have potentially studied leadership or been in leadership sessions before, you could spend days talking about the different leadership theories. We're going to compact it down to some of the really important ones that we find for, especially within the community sports settings. We're also going to learn about and practice and ways you can practice key skills around kind of building teams, influencing others, a bit on emotional intelligence, and then obviously the importance of creating a positive culture in your club. What I'd like to do, given you are all leaders in some way within your sports clubs, I'd like you just, if you could, to introduce yourself to the chat function. If you could please type your name, your club, and an off-field achievement you've seen in your time at the club. We've asked this a few different times. If you've written one before, potentially another one you've seen, it doesn't have to be something that you achieved yourself, but just something you've seen during your time at the club. I'll give you a minute or so to type that out. It always helps to give context to those that we've got joining us in the room tonight, not only for myself as a presenter, but for also those that are listening in, so we can get a good understanding of the types of sports and clubs we have represented. Tim, Secretary Oakley Golf Club, have established an Instagram presence for the club. That's fantastic. Especially, I don't know whether you found, Tim, we've seen that with golf clubs, that has been challenging, not only golf clubs, but a few different clubs where they might have a different demographic within the club. They might not have as many junior members that typically across those kind of platforms. But those clubs that do it and do it well can really see potential huge increase in participation because you open yourself up to a broader range of potential members. Tim, have you found anything like that in I guess, establishing the platform?
Yeah, most of our demographic is a bit older, but we're finding we're getting a lot more likes from a younger demographic, and the whole purpose is just to spread the message around the community and try and attract players and new members. So it's better than what we had, I guess, which was nothing. So it's just one form of getting our name out there, I guess.
I happened to listen to a presentation by one of the new general manager of clubs at a presentation on Friday, and he said the same thing, that especially for golf at the moment, they're trying to capitalise on participation in any form in the sport is a positive. It doesn't have to be purely signing up as a member. It counts as participation. So I think the more that clubs can kind of look at different ways to just expose themselves as a club in the community, the better, I think. Great example. There's plenty of others that are coming in which is as well at the same time, which is great to see. Janice, we've merged our summer track team with Melbourne to increase both clubs' summer numbers. That's fantastic. Peter, club has had significant growth at the new facility. Covered off a few different areas. Commenced strategic planning process. Andrew, excellent. So there's a few different areas that cover off, from facilities, marketing, obviously, strategy. So that's great to hear, everyone. What I'll do next, as I said, I want to start off tonight by just going back to some of the things we finished off last session covering, because I want to really show you how it all translates into tonight's discussion around leadership, and then obviously into our final session around kind of being your best as a club. So when we talked about kind of recruitment of volunteers, so that's obviously trying to bring in new volunteers from potentially outside your club, or you're trying to get people that haven't volunteered with your club in the past or aren't currently volunteering, trying to get them to take up a role within your club. So the kind of top tips that we gave around that were really look to make a plan around the particular areas you need volunteer support to cover. So that's really taking the time to actually understand, okay, yes, we want volunteers, but if we want volunteers and we do get them in the door, what are they potentially going to do? So having a plan around that, and then that can potentially be used to sell those new to your club or potentially not sure whether they're going to sign up. If you can be really clear and specific about the kind of role that they're going to fill, it might be the difference between whether they're willing to put their hand up or not by giving them that little bit more certainty around it. Similarly, following on from that point, second point here is preparing role or job descriptions to give clarity as to what people will be asked to do. Again, that might be the difference between someone signing up or not. It also means for your current volunteer group, everyone kind of has an understanding as to what role they fill. I'm sure, especially as a result of COVID, you'll all be filling a variety of different areas. But in terms of a best practice model, the more you can move towards everyone kind of has a set area that they look after, it makes it easier when you're trying to fill those positions when people eventually leave. You then have a better understanding of when you're asking people what kind of role they're going to expect to fill. And it means you have that better segmentation. So people actually feel like, okay, well, I'm responsible for this area. I don't have to feel obligated to fill another area. You have that nice split. So as I said, obviously COVID's been a huge challenge for that. But if we're moving towards a best practice model, that's what we're trying to consider as much as possible. The other thing to think about, and I'm going to show the slide shortly around those segments that we discussed within the first session. So Sport Australia put together that study and they really segmented the different types of volunteers and non-volunteers that you have within your club setting. So have a think about as a club who you're potentially trying to identify. So if you are trying to present that you want to get people in the door because you see you have a lot of community-minded people rather than potentially a bigger group of parents of children, you really have to think about when you're trying to target them to get them in as volunteers, what's going to be appealing for them. So they want to feel part of a community, that they like to be involved around sporting clubs because they like to feel that sense of community. So what can you sell within your club environment to make them feel comfortable within that? So obviously some examples that we gave around buddy systems. For parents, potentially it's cost savings, and that can be for participants as well. So if they volunteer a certain number of hours per year, that they get a reduction in their membership fees, that might be an example. Sense of belonging, as I said, that's the community, and the short-term roles as well. So kind of asking if you've got a season coming up, you're not expecting them to sign up potentially for the whole season. It might be for a month, or it might be for a couple of weeks. It might just be for the length of their season, or it might be for the calendar year. But being at least having consideration around the term of the role that they're signing up for. And the last one to touch on, don't be afraid to look outside the box, especially now when clubs are struggling for volunteers. Now it's time as better time as ever to really have a think about, okay, these aren't the typical people that we might have approached in the past, but we now need to start thinking about innovative ways to bring people in as volunteers, who that might be. It might be within your sponsorship groups. It might just be those within your community. It might be students, those that are looking for placement hours. There's a range of different ways you can have a think about to look outside the box of those that are always just walking in your door. So there's some of the tips we touched on from a recruitment side of things. Retention, so these are those that are volunteers currently and that you need to really consider how you are going to keep them on as volunteers. These were the three main tips that we talked around. Obviously, it is easier to keep current volunteers happy than finding new ones to replace them. So important that you have some kind of system that you check in with them quite regularly and you find out what is and isn't working for them. You'd much rather be able to have that conversation if it is that they feel that they are giving way too much time and they don't think it's going to be sustainable long term. If you have that conversation earlier, you might be able to potentially give some of their tasks to someone else or have a bit more of an even spread if possible within your club, rather than them feeling completely overwhelmed and they just say, no, I've had enough, and they leave. Having that conversation again earlier is much better, and finding out what they find as why are they volunteering? So find out what the value is for them. Have that discussion, and are there ways that you can potentially enhance that to make them feel even more valued and part of the club. The second point, the greatest threat to retention is the perception, as I said, that their time's not being used productively. So really important to recognise your volunteers. We had some great. Nikki last session kind of talked around the award structure that they have within their club. And that's a fantastic way. It's a very simple way, but a fantastic way at the end of each year to recognise those that give their time to the club. Again, it can be a really simple exercise, but for a lot of people that volunteer their time, that might be the thing that keeps them going next year, is that they actually still feel like when it gets to the end of the season, the time that they give is recognised in some way. Something as simple as this, something like tonight, that there might be certain volunteers in your club that don't have access to these kind of sessions for various reasons. Something as simple as you emailing them a link and saying, look, I think it'd be great for you to attend this. We see you as an important part of the club. That might be, again, a really simple exercise that you do, but it might be the difference between them feeling like, hang on, this club's really invested in me. They really see me as important, and can keep them involved longer term. And look, the last one, we've touched on a few of these as part of the previous slides, but retention needs to really start with allowing volunteers to do their role to the best of their ability. So whether that comes down to position descriptions, giving real clarity, the training and support. The buddy system was another really good one that we touched on last session. So especially if you look at roles like it might be a secretary or treasurer, where there is a little bit of financial literacy, or you do have to have some kind of skill set to be able to fill that. That might be overwhelming to some, but if you spend the time budding or mentoring with those individuals, you might be able to show them the ropes, and that reduces some of the fear or uncertainty they might have had. So some of the things that you can start thinking about from a volunteer management side of things. Benefits of succession planning. So we've said this through a few of our different topics, whether it was governance, we touched on a bit in planning, and obviously within volunteering as well. Having an eye to the future, really make sure you've got that pipeline of volunteers going forward. So if one of your key volunteers happens to leave the club for whatever reason, you're not left in a complete panic where thinking we don't know who we're going to fill that role. You've at least got some kind of an understanding as to who the potential next leaders within your club are, and looking for ways to upskill and mentor those future leaders as well. Consideration within succession planning, and I touch on it within my final side from a leadership side of things, is planning for being a more diverse and inclusive volunteer and governance structure. So identifying potentially where your gaps and shortfalls are, and planning for ways to fill them. So we usually take that from two different angles. So firstly, having a look within your participation group within your club. Hopefully and ideally, that is also reflected within your volunteer group. So you should have similar demographics from your participation perspective to also within a volunteering and leadership perspective. If not, that might be for different reasons. You might be a more predominantly junior club, so that will obviously be different. But there also might be ways within that you can actually address yourself as a club. So your leadership structure might in some way be preventing others from wanting to join. So what can you do to address that? And what can you do? And obviously externally. So having a look down the main street, going to the supermarket, those kind of people that you see when you walk down this main street in the supermarket, hopefully are reflected within your club as well. Again, it might be different reasons that are preventing that, but reasons within your control, you should be trying to plan as much as you can to try and fill those gaps and shortfalls. And the last one, I won't go into too much detail, but again, for those that haven't seen this or didn't see the first session, really useful way to have a look at the different types of segments of volunteers. So these are the ones that your club will fit into one of these categories. There might be multiple different categories, but the top layer or the top row is around those are the typical volunteers we see in community sport, and the bottom row are those that typically don't volunteer for different reasons. So when you are looking for ways to plan around how you're going to recruit or retain volunteers, making sure you've got a mind as to which category they potentially fit into, that means you can then be a bit more strategic as to how you either recruit or retain them. All right, moving into leadership. And look, as I said at the start, leadership is a really broad topic, and we could talk for hours and hours on leadership, but I want to keep this as simple as we can tonight within a community sport context. So look, I really like this definition of leadership because I think it's got the full life cycle of a club in mind. It's not just for the individual, it's for what happens once you leave the club as well. So look, really simply, leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impacts last in your absence. The point made through this, the one that resonates most with me, and I'd be interested to see others' thoughts as well. Obviously, I think you all would have seen, and sometimes that's necessitated where there are clubs that there is a really strong one or two leaders within the club, and they are fantastic for the club because they do a bulk of the work. They're the main drivers of what the club does. But the risk, obviously, with that is that once those people leave, it can leave a really big hole for people to fill. So a really good leadership structure, you're going to have those strong individuals that do a lot of the work, but those individuals should also have mind to, okay, well, how do I make others within the club feel more comfortable? How do I make others feel more confident to potentially take on leadership roles and positions? And you're empowering others to have that confidence, because that means you've got that confidence that when the day eventually does come that you do leave the club for whatever reason, you know you've left the club in a better place. You know you've got comfort that there are the next generation of leaders coming through, those that can easily fill your role as much as they can. And that's a really important part of sport. I've said it a few times, COVID has reduced the overall volunteer workforce, so that's meant that individuals have had to do more themselves. But as we get towards hopefully what is a COVID normal, we get back towards similar to what we had previously. Just keep that definition in mind, is really about empowering others and having that sense of, okay, let's have that long-term hat on as well. When I leave, I've got some confidence that the club's in a great position, the next leaders are in place. This one, I think a few people would have probably potentially seen this previously, or potentially seen it within their own clubs. So I'm just going to mute someone's just come in. So, as I reckon a few people would have seen this before. Previous president only interested in the on-field success of the senior football team and probably the male football team, which left the rest of the club feeling second rate. And they brought an individual on board who has changed the attitude to everybody being equal, and that's had an enormous change. And the most notable thing about that is that they have more players that then they know what to do with, typically juniors, and there is much more family involvement, which has a different feel. I think a lot of clubs will have seen this over the years, especially with the rise in women and girls participation in sport in a range of different sports. But also from a cultural perspective, general kind of welcoming and inclusive natures of clubs, it's really important that you have the individuals within your club that can help drive that. So that sense of culture of a club is really led from the top down. So your leaders in the club need to really be open and welcoming of others. They need to really have an open mind to potentially who are those that are going to participate in the club on field, and who are those that are going to help off the field as well. And the more welcoming and inclusive a club is, again, the huge benefits that you're going to see from an on-field and off-field perspective, and especially from COVID. You don't want to talk bottom line often, but the simple reality is the more people that you have through the door generally leads to a better financial bottom line for clubs. So such an important role leadership can play in defining culture. I'm going to touch on that a little bit shortly. So look, leadership styles and theories, for those that attended the planning session, I kind of talked in the context that strategic planning, SWOT analysis, those kind of words can seem really corporate. And I think to me, leadership styles and theory can sit a little bit in the same boat, that there is a lot of it out there. If you Googled leadership styles, leadership theories, you would see pages and pages and pages of academic articles, peer-reviewed articles, books, range of different things that are out there. But we want to bring it back to, within a community sport context, what are the benefits from at least understanding a little bit around what are the different kind of leadership styles potentially, and some theory around it. So the benefits that we typically see are that it really helps you as leaders within your club understand areas of strength and, almost more importantly, weakness. So all of you will play a leadership role within your club in some kind of context, whether that's as a committee member, a general volunteer, it might be a coach, it might be an on-field leader, but all of you will have some kind of leadership role within your club. So it is important to understand what your strengths are as a leader and what your weaknesses are. It doesn't mean that you then have to always put all your time into focusing on your weaknesses, but if you can at least identify, okay, well, this isn't something I'm great at, but someone else in the club is really good at, then you start to build off each other's kind of strengths and weaknesses and see ways that you can work off each other, which is really important within a community sport context. So what we're going to do, ask yourself what leadership theory you agree with or would like to follow, which we're going to go through shortly. And the benefit, obviously, of that is you can understand how to better lead your group. So you then understand, okay, well, this is the kind of leadership theory I typically adopt, or these are the kind of people I'm working with, and this is their kind of personality trait. So this is the kind of leadership theory or strategy that they typically will best kind of work under. So you then start to think about, as the leaders of the club, how you can, as I said, it doesn't mean you have to adapt your personal style, but you can potentially expose them to people that they can learn off because of their kind of style. So it's really important to take that time to assess yourself as individuals and your other leaders in the club as to which kind of style you fit under. We're going to get, as I said, we've got an activity we're going to get to shortly, and I really want some feedback from that one. So I'm going to ask a few people some questions shortly, but we'll just work through a few more content side of things first. So on the screen here, these are some of the I guess, the popular leadership theories, and we're going to send you the slides so you can have a read through these in your own time. Look, a range of different ones. Great man theory. I don't know. I do not love the name, but the great man theory. So that kind of says excellent leaders are born, not developed. So you have those kind of inherent skills and personality traits that lead you to being a certain type of leader. The trait theory. So again, natural qualities kind of tends to create good leaders. So having certain qualities doesn't necessarily mean someone has strong leadership skills, but it just means that there are, I guess, those that are more comfortable kind of taking on extra responsibility, those that are comfortable kind of standing up in front of people and speaking, those that are potentially make decisive decisions might lead to kind of be natural qualities of leaders, and especially the empathy and kind of having some kind of understanding to those around you. Again, natural qualities that tend to create good leaders. A couple of other ones. So the other ones that are kind of more around leadership qualities are kind of built around the situation you potentially are facing. So there are some leaders that can kind of adapt their style based on the situation. So that they might be able to, in certain situations, that they are really empathetic, whereas they see other situations that they need to kind of be more commanding or controlling or decisive. Behaviours, those that are kind of, you build your leadership skills based off the environment that you're around. So if you spend more time in a kind of coaching capacity, especially with juniors, you have more of those kind of development leadership skills. Whereas if you're in a kind of more cut and thrust environment, again, that might be a more stronger leadership personality, decisive leadership personality. There's a range of different leadership theories out there. I don't want to spend too much time on the leadership theories because the leadership style, I think, is the most important. But it is leadership style what is built off leadership theory. So it is kind of important to understand there isn't one size fits all theory around what leadership looks like. There are a range of different kind of ways that leadership can be defined. Whatever best resonates with you and what you think kind of fits your kind of personality, go with that. Don't feel like there's one size fits, as I said, one size fits all. There are a range of different ones in that kind of area. But this is what I want to spend a little bit of time going through because I want to do a bit of a self-assessment based off this as well. So as I said at the top here, leadership style is the way a leader approaches managing team members. So leadership styles were developed as a result of the studies on leadership theory, and each style has some distinct qualities. So when we say distinct qualities, there are going to be strengths and weaknesses to each particular leadership style, and there's no right or wrong way to the way you approach being a leader or who you are as a leader. It just means that the better you understand as at the start what type of leader you are, the better you then know, okay, well, how do I work with others? What are the type of people that will best learn off me? And what kind of ways am I able to make decisions versus potentially someone else in the club? And what kind of roles do you best fit potentially based on your leadership styles? So working through a few of these, so the coach, recognising strengths and weaknesses, you have an ability to help people set goals and provide a lot of feedback. So very interactive within that coach role. All of you, I'm sure, will have seen what a good coach looks like, and this kind of fits within the leadership coach style too. So, and that kind of depends based on who you're coaching as well. So if you're coaching juniors, again, you're much more on the development focus. If you're at an elite level, it's much more on an achievement-based focus. So a different style depending on who you're working with. Visionary, managing through inspiration and confidence. So those are the ones that are typically out the front, public speakers. They're the ones that people feel that extra level of kind of confidence is on the screen, but that extra level of confidence themselves because of having this person involved, because they've got that particular characteristic around them. Servant, kind of a bit of a flip side where instead of kind of being out the front and wanting to be seen, the servant is the one that kind of, as a leader, they want others to kind of fill those roles. They want others to be seen. They want others to feel valued and have that ability to kind of step forward. So they're the ones that kind of step behind the scenes. Again, it's a very much a development role, but you lead in your own way in that capacity. You want to see, especially when you're thinking about, okay, I want to leave this place, the club, in a good place when I finish up my time. If you're empowering others, you're giving others the confidence to fill those roles, you might have that increased sense of confidence in doing that. Authoritarian, again, there might be some strengths and weaknesses based on this, but they make decisions with little or no input from others. The benefit from that sometimes can be that you can make decisions quickly. You don't get stuck on certain conversations or arguments for long periods of time because you've got that person that can say, no, this is the way we're going to go about it. Obviously, the downside potentially of that sometimes is the decisions might be the wrong ones if you're not taking on board the input and feedback from those that actually have really valuable input or feedback for that position or for that situation. You might be making a decision that isn't all that well considered. So right or wrong ways around that, strengths and weaknesses fit within that particular leadership style as well. Hands-off kind of sits within that servant role, but really strong delegator. Don't provide a lot of supervision. So again, strengths and weaknesses within that empowers others. Others get that really strong development in their own skills in some senses because they are kind of thrown in the deep end and they're asked to fill those roles. Again, downside of that potentially is that they're not getting the supervision that they might need for that particular position. Whereas if you had that more hands-on approach, you might be able to give them that development. So again, taking that time to look through who you're actually dealing with, who's going to benefit most from the particular leadership style and who won't on the flip side. Democratic, so you consider the opinions of others before making a decision. So it's kind of the flip side of the authoritarian. Again, benefits are you are well considered. You're taking a lot of information on board before making the decision that you think is the right one, but it can be potentially a time-consuming exercise in doing that. So is that right for certain circumstances, or do you need that little bit more decisiveness? Again, strength and weaknesses on that side of things. The pace setter is more, they lead by example. So they're the one out the front. They might be the president that's doing all the work, and that they set the standard. The others on the committee or others in the club see what's expected of them based on what they see from the other leaders. So really, as it says here, really strong emphasis on high standards and on performance as well. And bureaucratic, last one is more around kind of really following a strict hierarchy and following procedure. Again, can be a huge benefit, especially if we look at it from a risk management side of things, is that typically you're going to see within a bureaucratic side of things that they're risk averse. Benefits obviously in that you're not exposing the club to as many risks potentially. But again, you might be missing out on viewpoints or feedback from others that might be lower on the hierarchy or on the leadership chain within the club because you are potentially listening to those below the level just below you. And it can be time-consuming following procedure, doing those sort of things. So a range of different leadership styles presented here. As I said, there's no right or wrong way. There are strengths and weaknesses for each of them. But these are what you're typically going to see within any leader within the club is you're going to fit within one or two, potentially three different categories. And understanding where you fit then can help you understand, okay, well, this is what my strengths are as a leader. This is what my weaknesses are. Doesn't mean you have to change yourself. You might want to potentially improve or learn as a leader, but it then helps guide, okay, well, these are the kind of people, well, this is the way I need to lead others. This is what doesn't work with certain individuals once you understand how they learn as well. And can really help you as a club going forward if you go through that activity of actually understanding where you and others within the club sit.
Jessie, it's Nikki from Waverley Hockey Club. I think the reality, as you touched on, is that you kind of use a variety of those styles, and I certainly prefer myself to coach and be a pace setter, but sometimes you just have to be an authoritarian in a volunteer community organisation where things just need to get done. So yeah, you can have kind of your ideal, but sometimes there isn't enough people or isn't enough time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the benefit, at least in understanding, okay, in certain circumstances, I need to act within a different style. At least within that understanding, you kind of know in what circumstances it works and in what it doesn't. So if you are always an authoritarian and you kind of potentially put that on other people within the wrong context, you might turn them off for some reason because they just feel like, especially if we're looking from kind of potentially people wanting to volunteer and not doing so, if they're exposed to authoritarians at all times and they don't feel like their input is valued, they're not going to put their hand up to volunteer. So again, that's not to say that it's wrong to be an authoritarian, but if you have that nice mix between either you yourself have the different styles you can adopt, or at least within your committee structure, you have those different styles. So people can kind of go to or gravitate towards the kind of individuals that they resonate with. So it's a really good point, Nikki, to have that kind of understanding as to what circumstances fits what type of style. What we're going to move on to next. So this is the exercise. So hopefully, as I said, hopefully all of you got the piece of paper. If not, at least so you'll have the document I sent through today, if not a piece of paper that you can fill out. What I'd love you to do is spend a couple of minutes. So you can write some words in the box, or you can at least just tick it as to what of those kind of 8 different leadership styles you think you fit under. And as Nikki kind of said, if you feel like there's a few different ones you want to adopt in different settings, note that down so you can actually have an understanding as to where you fit. Once you've done that, once you kind of feel like, oh, this is the kind of leadership style I think I adopt or I kind of fit under, write down some words as to what makes you think you have this style. So why do you think you might be a particular pace setter within a club? So are you someone that you expect high standards, you think you lead by example, and by doing that you bring people along with you? Write that down and then note potentially what you think are some individual strengths and weaknesses of this style. I've kind of touched on a few of them, but from your side of things, you might have been able to even see, once you do that self-reflection, you might have kind of used your leadership style in certain settings and you've seen that this didn't work or this did work. And then based on this, how do you approach other volunteers and participants? So again, having a think around, okay, if I am a visionary, what does that mean for others within the club? How can I benefit the club in certain settings by acting in this way? Or how do I potentially, if I know I'm an authoritarian and this isn't going to work in certain settings, do I have to pull myself back, or do I have to involve other people's, or do I have to potentially change my style? Hopefully that all makes sense. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to work through this. And then again, I'd love some feedback from others. If you want to just type it straight in the chat or take yourself off mute, potentially some self-reflection. And even start that process when we think around kind of how do you approach other volunteers or participants, have a look at that top kind of the first 2 rows and think, okay, well, other people that sit on the committee with me, or the other coaches that are around me, have a think about what kind of style they might fit under. And then have a think about, okay, what impact does that have on how you approach other volunteers and participants? And even when we talk around, okay, who are we going to recruit, have a think around that leadership style of thing. So yes, we look at skill sets from someone might have a strong marketing background, someone might have a strong finance background. That's great, but we might also identify that we are a committee that are really strong within, as I go back to the authoritarian side of things. So we are a committee that make decisions quickly. We don't kind of look outside our committee room when making decisions. We might need someone that has a different leadership style that might be able to help us kind of really embrace others within the club. Or you might have a really a democratic committee, so that you are a committee that really think about the opinions of others before making a decision. And based on that, you might spend yourselves having 4 or 5 hour committee meetings because of that. And you really need someone that comes in with a really strong kind of mindset that can kind of bring everyone together and make those decisions quickly that need to be made. Greg, so looking through this, I think I swap over depending on circumstance. Love to think I'm more a coach servant who is democratic, but some may think I'm hands-off authoritarian. Interesting, Greg. So in terms of that, what kind of context do you reckon, or circumstances do you see facing? Is that all in a kind of a committee kind of role, or what kind of role is that kind of fitting under?
More ad hoc. When things happen, you just got to get things to happen pretty quickly. People on the shoulder and say, can you help out? And I'm trying to do something else, so can you just help out here? So
yeah, absolutely. Do you find, when you think about others around the club, do you think kind of you have similar leadership styles, or have you noticed, even if you think about it, that people have kind of different personalities within your group?
It's quite varied. We've got a good board, but I think a lot of people, and probably some other clubs too, there's you become a martyr. You try to do everything yourself, and trying to get other people to help out becomes a challenge. So And when you just give it to somebody, you just want them to do it. Yep. You don't want them to sort of go. But the variety of tasks, our volunteers are quite good.
Yep.
In getting things done. It's tapping people on the shoulder and say, "Can you help out?" They generally do.
Yep.
But be authoritarian in that way too. But yeah, it's a challenge to get the people to do what we need to get done.
Yep.
And I said last meeting, the complication at the moment, we've picked up 2 or 3 paid employees over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And how that impacts on volunteers is quite interesting, because there's an expectation that the paid staff will do everything, but the paid staff are doing a completely different role.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a good one. I remember we had this discussion last time around. Yeah, kind of that paid position, and again, it comes down to when we spoke about, we outlined kind of the benefits of those position descriptions and position descriptions that you can potentially change on the fly as well. So you're not being you're not changing it in the sense that people feel kind of confused about it, but you at least at any point in time, people kind of have a clear understanding as to who fills what roles. And you're right in saying that kind of paid employees complicates that a little bit, especially if people are receiving a salary around it. That others in the club might think, well, they're getting paid, they should do everything. But their time is just as limited potentially as others, and they're being paid only for certain hours. So really defining kind of what those roles fill, really important. And also the styles fit within that as well. So you might have noticed especially when you look at the kind of circumstantial theory around leadership, that might change. So that now that you've brought on paid employees, you might move towards a different leadership style because the paid employees kind of fill that role, that do a lot of the work. So you're now potentially having more hands off and you're delegating. But you still have to have that kind of the ability to say, no, at certain times I need to come back in and need to be strong because that's my role as a community member. So, yeah, good to know.
Yeah, one of the things which happened was that we've got an assistant bar person who does all the catering and runs the bar. We had a social function at the club and everyone thought she would lock up, but leaving a female to lock up at 10 or 11 o'clock at night was just unacceptable. Everyone made assumptions and didn't follow through. So the committee, the board need to make sure that there are volunteers to do the lockups and stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, totally. Look, the benefit of having this kind of self-assessment, as I said earlier, makes you better understand kind of what the different leadership styles are, where you potentially sit. And the more that you then do this kind of activity within your club, the better understanding you can have, okay, well, this person might be better suited to dealing with this situation, or I might just have to adapt my style for this particular situation if the case so arises. Or potentially who do we need to recruit in terms of their not just their skills, but their style as well, because we just need this within our committee setting or within our overall volunteer group setting. I'm just going to roll through this. Again, this is more some general tips around kind of how leadership fits within overall volunteering. So Sport Australia kind of put together, as we touched on a little bit around the segments, but they've also put together some elements of volunteering and the elements fit a lot within kind of the leadership side of things as well. So when you're thinking about leading and leading others within your club, the 5 elements that they kind of identified around volunteering is that individuals want to make it feel like they belong. They want to feel like they belong within a club setting. They want it easy to get involved. They want roles tailored to their particular needs. They want to feel supported. And, of course, they want to have that real value and sense of community. So when we're talking from a leadership perspective, these are 5 really clear kind of common areas that you can look to tap into. If you're thinking, okay, well, I'm a leader, I lead others in the club, it might be kind of informal leadership roles where you fill a committee role and you've got others within the club that aren't on the committee. So in essence, you're representing the members. But there might be formal volunteer or kind of leadership positions that you fill. So you might be a coaches coordinator within the club. So you then have a leadership position over coaches. So the way you lead and the way that you work with others, try and have these kind of elements in mind. So when you're working with others in the club, you want to make sure you have some kind of structure or some kind of system that makes them feel like that they belong. Whether that's checking in, whether that's reward and recognition strategies, whether it is purely investing in their upskilling or their training, easy to get involved. That's another one that if you are a leader, you are on the committee, you want to make sure that others in the club feel like that they are welcomed to get involved in the club. And if they wanted to put their hand up, very easy to do so. They're not going to feel like they are a burden, or they're not going to feel like it's a closed door, that it is quite easy to get involved. Roles being tailored to needs, that's an obvious one. Supported, again, that doesn't have to be you individually that support them. If you've got a different kind of style, or you don't potentially personally have the same kind of ability to relate, but at least making them feel supported in some way, whether that's a mentor from someone else in the club setting that has the kind of characteristics that match up better with them. But at least you've had to think about, okay, well, what kind of support structures need to be in place for this particular individual. The next few slides are kind of around club culture, and how important leadership really is in setting a club culture. There's not one particular individual that kind of defines the culture of a club. Everyone within a club context plays some kind of role in setting the culture, but it is really driven by the leadership of the club, and that's kind of important to take in mind, is that whilst everyone plays a role in club culture, you've heard the saying before that the fish rots at the head. If those in the club kind of see your leaders of the club behaving in a particular way, they might feel that it's okay for them to behave in that same kind of manner. So you want, as leaders, to really role model the behaviours and the culture that you expect within your club setting. So when we touch on here, kind of it's the behaviours that are rewarded, accepted, and those that are challenged. A good example of that is if you as a club, you don't want kind of smoking at junior games being a part of your kind of club culture. If someone walked up to the club game and they saw that happen and it wasn't being challenged by others, that's something that they think, okay, well, either that's okay for me to do, or they think we don't stand for that ourselves. We actually don't want to be associated with this club because we don't like those kind of behaviours. So as a leadership group, you really need to think around, okay, well, who do we want to stand for? What do we want to accept, and what do we want to model as a club, and what do we want to actually stand up and challenge? So really important part of kind of setting the culture as a leader within your club context. So within that, really important as leaders in terms of how you set a club culture, 3 different ways here that you can kind of really be an influence to others. So firstly, around your relationships. So letting people get to know you and being really open and transparent as much as you can, and getting to know others in the club. So you can really build that level of trust. It isn't a closed committee where people kind of feel they can't raise concerns, or that they can't raise potential queries. That you have, as a committee, you are appointed as a committee member to represent the members themselves. So in terms of that, you need to be able to model strong relationships. You need to be able to have a track record that you're going to call out behaviours that you think aren't acceptable, or that your members don't feel are acceptable. And you're going to model the behaviours that your members expect of you, and being really respectful in terms of relationships as well. And that's, I'm not just talking committee members there, that's obviously coaches as well, coordinators, having those respectful relationships that whether you're talking to a participant, a crowd member, another coach, committee member, that you have that level of respect. It's not just, okay, well, I get on well with the committee members because we deal with each other a lot, and you're kind of seen as I've said, that closed door. But also the next level of that is that you don't want to be seen as looking down on others within the club that don't have an active kind of role, that you are still seen as being really respectful to everyone within your club context. Reinforcement, so reinforcing others' ideas. As I said, recognising the behaviours that you're looking for, and rewarding them. So a simple idea of that, when we talked about kind of Nicky's, and this same with a lot of clubs, the awards at the end of the year, if you're rewarding people for volunteering their time and for showing certain behaviours, that's simply in itself setting the culture that we as a club really value our volunteers. We as a club really value those that are willing to give their time. And that's showing and that's modelling the behaviours that you really love from other people within the club as well. And obviously, it's really important to stand up and challenge when there are behaviours that occur that don't align with you. If you let each behaviour go without being challenged, again, that can be something that means that either that behaviour itself is going to be enhanced and broadened, other people will do it, or potentially other behaviours that have previously been in the past called on or called up for, and now also kind of others are willing to push the line because they think, oh, well, this one hasn't been called on, so I'm going to go with this one as well, if that makes sense. Nikki, did you have something? I think you took yourself. Did you have anything to add before?
I was just going to say I saw something really great on Facebook over the weekend where another sporting club was really promoting a couple of their volunteers and some of their achievements. And I think that's also a really great way, if you've got a good Facebook community going with your club, for people to go, oh, that sounds like something I could do, or gee, that, you know, that person's getting some accolades. I'd like that too.
Yeah, awesome. That's fantastic. And I think when we talk around kind of the first one around building trust and getting people to know you, it's another way you can do it as well is I've seen clubs do it where they kind of do a profile on some of their committee members to show that committee members are human as well. We volunteer our time just as much as anyone else. Just because we're on the committee doesn't make us any different. You're really showing the human side of the people within your club, and that can really resonate with certain individuals if they say, okay, well, this person's got an interest in something that I have a common interest in, and that can be something that can start a conversation. So, great point, Nikki. And again, it's about building those relationships, really reinforcing the behaviours that you want to see as a club. And the last one is around relevance and keeping the conversation relevant. A lot of clubs are going to have a lot of history involved, and that sometimes can really have an impact on club culture positively and negatively. But in terms of if you want as a leadership group to really drive the culture you want to see, bringing it into today and saying, okay, yeah, that might have been who we were as a club, but this is who we want to be now, and this is what we want to be going forward, can really a strong driver for that club culture and can bring people on board. You might, and we see this sometimes, that some are really connected with the past, and losing the past can be something that might drive them away from the club. But if it's done in the right way, if it's done in we want to recognise the history, but we want to really build a culture around, especially when we look at kind of being welcoming, inclusive, gender equity, cultural equity, those kind of different areas. It is really important to say, okay, yes, this is our history. We're going to embrace our history, but this is our future as well, and try and blend them together. It's really important in terms of what you can do as a leader in setting club culture. In terms of those challenges that you're going to have to kind of potentially try and stamp out, be prepared to challenge. So, look, it's not difficult when you have the support and the clear parameters. So if you have really clearly defined rules, potentially either they're placed around the club, or in terms of the general behaviours that if something happens that you don't like as a club or you don't stand for and it's called out straight away, that's really clear. Everyone in the club kind of knows where you stand. And also if you're hearing different voices calling it out, it's not just the same person over and over. Again, it's really clear to those that are potentially committing those behaviours and to others that are standing around that, no, this isn't just an edict of one particular individual. This is everyone in the club stands for this. This is something that we want to be as a club. So bringing more people on board, you're going to be able to challenge those behaviours a bit easier. Important as well to when you have to have those challenging conversations, you do it in the right way. So you're not trying to turn someone away from the club because of a particular behaviour, unless it is really serious. But you are having kind of two-way communication. Try and understand why they might have done that behaviour, what they can do going forwards, and the way you might be able to even potentially support them as a club. But it is respectful. It's not just kind of belittling them and making them feel lesser than. It is that two-way respectful conversation. It's really important. Maintaining kind of personal standards by responding rather than reacting, as it kind of fits within that top one, being respectful around it rather than just purely reacting immediately to a situation. And it's important within that as well, if you've got kind of policies or guidelines within your club around how certain behaviours are then dealt with, that you follow those policies and guidelines rather than just reacting immediately straight away and kind of losing track or potentially reacting in a way that isn't in line with your policies. Keeping that in mind is important. But, and the last dot on this page, you do at times need to be assertive. Some of those that have already spoken tonight have said that in certain circumstances, you just do have to be strong in the conversation you had, whether it's asking people to volunteer because you're just not getting people kind of putting their hand up themselves, that you have to just be strong. That's just an example, but there obviously are going to be other examples as well, especially with some of the serious behaviours. You actually just need to be really assertive and strong in the circumstances. The 4 C's, I'll roll through these pretty quickly because they are pretty straightforward and I think people would understand them. So when we are kind of acting in that leadership role and looking to set culture and looking at different circumstances, acting in a way that is cool and calm, considering others' opinions where possible so people feel like they actually can have a say within your club setting. You have that open communication. So committee discussions, there is obviously going to be some discussions that are had around a committee table that have to be confidential, but as much as you can, being open, being transparent. Coaching conversations, the same thing. You're being open, you're being transparent with potential players, and look, calling for and clarifying action. So that kind of fits within, once you consider others' opinions, you have that communication, you then have that real clear, okay, well, now we need to move to action. We need to make a call on this, and we need to be strong as a leader within the club setting, so that people still have that confidence that we are a decisive club, that we take others' opinions on board, but we do have the ability to say, okay, yep, let's move forward now and let's make the call that's in the best interest of the club. And the last one I want to touch on in terms of content is around kind of inclusive leadership. And that's where I said earlier around that you as a club, or what you want to be seen as a club in terms of your overall culture, the way you're seen in the community, it really needs to be driven by your leadership of your club. So if you want to be really seen as a welcoming, inclusive club, you need to model that as your leadership group. If you want different participant groups involved within your club or feeling comfortable within your club, you as your leaders start that. You potentially start the conversations in terms of even the structure of the leadership of your club. Try and have that diverse mix of skills and other kind of diverse and welcoming nature of your committee. Really model that as to the way you want to be seen as a club as a whole. You don't want to, we use it often, it's used quite often in sport contexts. You might have a really kind of welcoming, diverse general volunteer or participation group, but a committee might be pale, male and stale. It's something that is seen from time to time. I think definitely that's changing, and COVID presents a challenge in terms of people putting their hand up. But as I said earlier, those within your club should also be represented within your leadership group. So being inclusive, being welcoming, it's going to be so much of a benefit to your overall culture and welcoming people into your club if that's reflected from top down. Obviously, we went through volunteer management to start with and went through some of the tips around recruitment and retention. That then ties into the leadership discussion tonight. So you then kind of have an understanding, okay, well, this is the kind of structure that we want to set as a volunteer group, and this is potentially how we get people involved. Myself individually and as our leaders of our club, this is the way that we need to model it to potentially enhance that and build off that. Brian mentioned earlier, if you give people responsibility, they must have authority to use it. Absolutely. It's no good giving people or delegating, but then kind of, yes, they're delegated the role, but just in title only, not in terms of responsibilities as well. So if you are going to delegate, you're delegating properly. You're actually making them fill the role that they've been appointed to do. As I said at the start of the session, leadership, similar to strategic planning, similar to kind of SWOT analysis, it can be a very corporate kind of word. There's plenty of resources out there. But the main thing I'm trying to ask you to do is at least have a think around, what is my particular leadership style? In what type of settings do I potentially need to adopt certain styles, or do I need to get someone else in because they've got a leadership style that more fits that circumstance? And how can my leadership style, or how can what I do as a leader within the club help our overall club culture that then potentially brings more volunteers in the door, brings more participants in the door, and it all flows through. So it is quite open, but really having a think around and that self-reflection around where you sit as a leader, where others in your club sit as a leader, and that gap as well. They're all the things that I hope you've been able to take away from tonight. As I said, we'll send around the slides. There's some content in the slides that hopefully you can reflect back on and have a read through. We'll send the recording as well from tonight's session. Club help, again, I've kind of brought this up at the end of each session. I think most of you have all been in at least one session, but if you haven't seen Club help already, click on there. There's plenty of resources that can help you in your volunteer management journey and some on leadership and coaching as well. And as I said, the final session in this particular stream around volunteers is being your best. So delivered with Paul from Howard Andrews. And we're really going to look at the kind of roles and obligations of committee members, what's an ideal committee structure, and how to run effective meetings. And we'll take in context of that, obviously, the volunteer management and leadership styles. What kind of leadership styles fit within an ideal committee structure? So that'll be our final session in this particular stream. But if there's no more questions, I will formally wrap up for tonight, but I'll stay on for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to have a conversation following the session tonight. But thank you again very much for listening in tonight, and we'll see you next session.